Boyd-Barrett, Fáilte Rota Rash.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. If the Minister Donoghue affair raises worrying questions, alarming questions about the relationship between politics and big business, can I suggest, Taoiseach, that the trip you're going to be taking after leaders' questions to the World Economic Forum at Davos, where you will spend a few days swanning around with some of the world's richest people, some of the world's most profitable and wealthy corporations, also raise, on a grander scale, even bigger questions about the relationship between politics and the gross inequalities in wealth that we see in this country and across the world. There are some very nasty, sinister, hateful far-right forces that want to blame the problems in our society on desperate and vulnerable refugees fleeing war and poverty, but they might be better focusing on what really is the epitome of the problems we face in the world, which is the world's billionaires and multinationals discussing the future of the world, particularly when you look at the Oxfam report that really reveals the absolutely gross, grotesque and growing inequality that exists between the super rich in this country and across the world and the vast, vast majority of people who are crushed with the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, impacted by the crisis in our hospitals and in many of our public services. And the facts revealed in the report are really shocking, that the number of people in this country who have over 50 million in personal wealth has doubled since 2012, that the number of people worth nearly 5 million each has doubled in the last same period, up to 20,000 people, that the richest 1% of our population now have more than a quarter of all the wealth, that the richest 10% have more than 64% of all the wealth, while as the poorest 50% have just 1.1% of the wealth. Grotesque and growing inequalities. So I want to ask Taoiseach, will you now consider something that we have called for a long time and that Oxfam are calling for now, and that is the introduction of a wealth tax, a modest tax on those who have wealth in excess of 4.7 million, they say in 1 year would raise more than €8 billion in extra revenue. Imagine what that would do to alleviate the crushing blows of the cost of living crisis, to address the housing crisis, to resource our hospitals to deal with the dire crisis we are facing in our health services. Will you now introduce a wealth tax to start to redistribute some of the huge wealth that exists in this country, but which is not being shared equally with the people of the country who generated that wealth?
Thank you very much. Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. First of all, I am sorry to disappoint you. I won't be spending a few days in Davos. I'll be there for maybe a day and a half. I have my responsibilities here and they take precedence, so I'll only be there for about a day and a half. But there is a busy programme of meetings and a busy programme of media engagements. And the advantage of Davos, quite frankly, is that there are so many politicians, so many world leaders, so many business leaders in the one place for 2 or 3 days that it would be remiss not to be there. I'll be able to do maybe 10 meetings, 15 meetings over the course of the next day and a half, which would otherwise take weeks to organise. And that's the advantage of the meeting. I know there are some people that believe it's part of some form of world government and we're all going off there to make decisions on behalf of the elites that secretly run the world. I guarantee you, Deputy, if that was the case, I'd go for the whole thing. But I won't be, because I have other things to do. In relation to your question, Deputy, we already have wealth taxes in Ireland. Our income tax system is regarded to be one of the most progressive in the world. Less than 1% of people in Ireland pay more than 20% of the income tax. We have the local property tax, and the bigger and more valuable your property is, the more property tax you pay. Those who have modest properties pay a modest amount. Those who have no property pay nothing at all. We have capital acquisitions tax. That's a tax on inheritance, for example, a tax on gifts. And Oxfam points out in their report that 2/3 of countries There is no inheritance tax at all if you pass on your money to direct descendants. In Ireland, it's 33%. We also have capital gains tax, which is a wealth tax in the share of businesses and property and shares, for example. And our tax there again is 33%, and the average across the world is only 18%. So that gives you a good example of the kind of wealth taxes that already exist in our country. I did have a look at the report. It's interesting. I'm going to look at it properly again when I have a bit more time. But I would have two questions about the report, not for you, but perhaps for others. And that is one around the methodology. Is it net wealth or gross wealth? Because as we all know from past experience, some people who are billionaires on paper or appear to be billionaires are actually fur coat and no knickers. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of assets on paper. They also have a lot of debts and liabilities, and their actual net wealth is negative or small, and it seems this report takes their gross wealth, and that would make it somewhat inaccurate to me. And the second thing is they specifically refer to 8 Irish billionaires. But when you look at the names of the 8 Irish billionaires, and most of them would be names that are familiar to you and me and most people in this House, most of them don't live here, most of them don't have their businesses based here, and most of them don't keep their assets here. Why do you think that is, Deputy? It's precisely because we have a tax regime that taxes wealth much more so than other countries.
Deputy Boyd-Barrett.
Yeah. You're right, there's no conspiracy. It's naked, brazen greed. And your answer does not explain how the number of people with more than €50 million or the number of people with up to €5 million in personal wealth has doubled. It doesn't explain how corporate profits have trebled in the last 10 years while ordinary people are suffering. And let me just give you an example. Just one of dozens that I had over Christmas and in the new year. A woman and her husband, income of $500 per week from invalidity and half carers. The husband has Alzheimer's. When they got a HAP tenancy, he was working. 5 years later, the rent has increased and they now pay €275 a week contribution to rent out of €500 they have in total. They cannot make ends meet. Her rent was due on the 13th of January and she cannot pay it. She has a gas bill of €700 unpaid and a new one to arrive later this month. Apparently, when she looked for an exceptional needs payment, she was told, no, you received 2 payments last year. Now that is the reality that ordinary people are facing. And what Oxfam pointed out was the gross and growing inequality in wealth had a lot to do with what they called greedflation, profiteering by big corporations taking advantage of the cost of living crisis to enrich themselves at the expense of families like this. Wouldn't a wealth tax be a way to address that gross inequality?
Thank you. Taoiseach, please.
Except, again, when it comes to that 50 million figure, I would wonder, is that a gross wealth figure or is it a net wealth figure? And how did Oxfam know how much people owe and what their debts are and what their assets are? So, I would wonder about the accuracy of that and whether or not it is gross wealth or net wealth. But one thing you are right about, we have seen a major increase in corporate profits around the world and Ireland in recent years. And as a consequence of that, we in Ireland have benefited from massive receipts in corporation profit tax from those companies. On a per head basis, we get more in corporation profit tax than almost any other country in Europe. I think only Luxembourg is maybe up there, 1 or 2 others. So our low tax regime on corporations means that we take in billions more than other countries do. And that is money we use to help people, like the people you mentioned there, Deputy. The €600 energy credit that the person you mentioned will benefit from, taken off their bills. The increases in welfare payments, €12 a week kicking in this month. The reductions in income tax kicking in this month. The 25% reduction in childcare costs kicking in this month. And I could go on. And provided we continue to encourage enterprise and tax it, we'll have the funds to do more.